Joining me now, Steve Rogers, Mike Baker, Sheriff Paul Babeu, and Sheriff David Clarke. Sheriff Clarke, let me start with you. You expressed a tremendous amount of outrage over on Twitter. And it feels, again, that perhaps something is going on with the national FBI and the lack of sort of support for local law enforcement efforts. The notion that this person was interviewed on two successive years and deemed or given sort of a pass bothers a lot of people, particularly after James Comey's statements today.
Epic intelligence failure. Those are all red flags. And I think after 49 Americans are slaughtered in a terrorist incident, I don't think it's unfair to be hypercritical of our intelligence agency, or domestic intelligence agency here in the United States, the FBI. Look, in fairness to the FBI, they're miscast. They are not an intelligence agency. They are an investigative agency. They went into this thing with a mindset of looking for evidence to establish probable cause to make an arrest and to prosecute. That's not what intelligence work is. Intelligence works on these three things. You want to identify threats, you want to know if they have the capabilities, and then you want to know if they're planning an attack, and then you want to notify somebody well in advance. You want to predict, preempt, and you want to prevent terror attacks. That's not what the FBI is doing through no fault of theirs. And you also cannot tie their hands. They have to be able to do some things that people are not comfortable with, things like surveilling mosques, things like informants inside of these organizations. And that's not to indict all Muslims, but you can't stick your head in the sand out of political correctness because these things are going to happen. So I think until we get, and I've said this before, Charles, I probably said it on your program, until we get a true intelligence structure, domestic intelligence structure in the United States, and we start prosecuting these things as acts of war and not criminal acts, we're going to continue to see this stuff. I know you can't predict every incident, and James Comey, in fairness to him, and I admire that guy, but we're not asking him to find a needle in a haystack. We're just asking him to find the haystack. And once they identify the haystack, which is what Omar Mateen was, with that plethora of evidence, then we'll look for the needle.
Steve Rogers, you were the military intel officer of the FBI National Joint Force. When James Comey says yes, it's suggested to me that he said that in the May 2013 interview that because Mateen had made contradictory statements, despite the fact that he admitted to the threats that he made, he admitted that he expressed a desire to be a martyr, but they felt that he wasn't serious in part because he wasn't getting his terror organizations right. And then again in July of 2014, even though he had some sort of association with the suicide bomber from El Nusra, still, and they went to the same mosque, still not enough evidence. What does it take for the FBI to really red flag someone and follow this all the way through?
Charles, this is the result of politically correct law enforcement policies that are being handed down to the federal agencies like the FBI and local law enforcement. Every officer you have on the air tonight on this group right now, they could tell you that one of the greatest assets a cop has is his instinct. Before Ferguson, before these policies came down, police officers on the street, FBI agents, any law enforcement officer, his instinct kicks in, and that causes him to go the extra mile. But today, if you go the extra mile, you're going to be called a profiler. You're going to be taken to task by the government. You, as a police officer, will run into many problems. They have hindered the ability for police officers to do the job.
And yet, Mike Baker, we do have watch lists, and we do monitor when people go abroad, particularly when we think they've gone abroad for training amongst one of these various terrorist groups. And so you've had a series of yellow, if not red flags, and still this guy slipped through the cracks.
Yeah, look, I understand the desire for people to blame somebody, right? That makes the horrible nature of this attack easier to process in a sense. It's got to be somebody's fault. Well, you know what? If we want to have that discussion, Steve's right. Let's talk about the playing field that law enforcement's allowed to operate in. And that's and again, we have to understand, if you want the Bureau to get on this individual, do their interviews, not have within those rules probable cause to continue and go into from a preliminary to an active investigation, then what are you saying? Well, we got to give them more leeway. Well, what happens when you do that? Well, you lose something on the privacy and civil liberties side. So there's a trade-off. And this is a very good conversation to be having. It's a much more efficient conversation than the knee-jerk go-to gun control conversation that always happens. But, yeah, I'm tired of people kicking the Bureau in the backside every time something like this happens, because they're operating within the parameters that are set by Congress, supposedly at the will of the people, to protect privacy and civil liberties.
Mike, before I go to Sheriff Babeu, though, when James Comey said at the end of his press conference, we're going to take a hard, long look at our own work, and we haven't, to think what we would do differently. And so far, when he said they don't think they would do anything differently, that does bother the American public. I know our law enforcement does everything for us, and they go beyond the call of duty. But it's really, maybe we watch too much TV, but it feels like this was someone who fell in their lap. And by the way, so did the last 3 or 4 of these terrorist monsters. They were on various watch lists. What are these watch lists, and why aren't they followed up? Mike, well, Sheriff Babeu, can you let me just Sheriff Babeu. I know that you're not on the FBI side or the federal side, but you can weigh in on that as well.
Well, I can tell you this, that we are at war. And we're not acting like this. When the commander-in-chief himself, President Obama, has said no less than 22 times that a graver national security threat than terrorism is, in fact, global warming. And so when that threat posture we take as a nation in looking at ISIS and other terrorist organizations, and we have incidents like this, local law enforcement, guys that look like me and Sheriff Clarke and women, will be fighting terrorism here throughout our country. That's not the preferred path that we should be taking. We should have a robust effort, not just intelligence gathering, but through our military to destroy ISIS, to destroy cells that we know offer great threat and harm to the United States. Not send 50 soldiers to Syria, then we really, really want to defeat them, as Obama said, and sends 250 more. Let's act like these are serious threats, grave threats to our international security, and destroy them.